Hello, welcome back to the channel. I got the Grand Cruiser put together, and tonight we're going to talk a little bit about what I learned during the build and a few other updates. So come back after the break and we'll jump in. To get started, I just want to say thanks to BitGo Hobby for sending this Grand Cruiser for review, along with a couple of other planes that we've already covered, the Waco and the C-47. This Grand Cruiser is modeled on the Cessna 310, and it's one of the scale planes in the Dynam lineup. Along with the Grand Cruiser and the C-47 and the Waco, BitGo Hobby carries a pretty good stock of other Dynam airplanes that are pretty cool to have. If you're in the market for a Dynam plane or some of the Detram radio equipment we've been looking at on the channel, make sure you give BitGo Hobby a look and see if they can help you out. On to the build review, and this is a little less of a build review and a little bit more of a assembly review. Let's call a spade here. This one is so simple that it barely qualifies as a build review. In fact, I even kind of thought I wasn't even going to do a video on it, but that's the format we have, and there are a few things to tell you about. So let's just jump right into that. And then before we wrap up, stick around because I've got a couple other channel updates for you as well. Right, so for assembly, I'm going to go ahead and poke at the instructions a little bit. They basically say, do this, and they don't give you a whole lot of detail. If you're the type that is not familiar with building RC planes, this might not be a great one to start with for you. It's got landing gear and flaps, and it's a low wing twin motor. Maybe if you're a beginner, that's not the right plane for you anyway. The instructions are just kind of okay. The main point about the instructions is they kind of tell you the things you want to do in the order that you want to do them, more than giving you specific details about what you're supposed to do. A little prior experience in assembling our RC planes would be handy with this particular plane. What I'll look at first, and I just want to throw out a couple words of caution on this, is the tail control surfaces. I want to make sure you can see this. Okay, these control horns, there are two things about these that are not ideal as far as I'm concerned. One is that they only glue in. There is no compression plate on the other side, and that's true for the elevator as well. I'm not a huge fan of that. I prefer, as I've mentioned in prior builds, to have a horn that goes through the material with a plate on the other side that screws in. But this is what we're left with, so this is what we deal with. The other thing that I'll caution you about, and I learned this lesson on the Mustang, these threaded quick connectors, they're not like the Dubro version where they're compression fits, and once they're on, they're on. These are threaded, so they can come off. The reason I'm pointing this out is that when I flew my Dynam Mustang for the first time, I lost the elevator, and the reason I did is because the little nut came off and the elevator control rod was just holding onto the connector, but the connector wasn't holding onto the control rod. So with that in mind, you have a couple of options here. I use Loctite, but Loctite's very dangerous because if you get Loctite on this plastic, it'll eat it up. So that's generally not recommended. I've got a steady enough hand where I can just get it on the threads and not worry about it too much. Other options are maybe a little CA glue, or even a dab of hot glue will help. But whatever you do, make sure you do something to keep that from unthreading, because if you don't, I can almost assure you you'll regret it. And then same thing with the screw. Once you get it set the way you want, just a little bit of Loctite in there is helpful to keep that elevator control rod from sliding in and out on the quick connector. And by the way, that holds true for the rudder and the elevator. Same thing on both, same mechanism on both. The other thing that I want to point out is that on the elevator, while I was putting the plane together, I noticed down here where the torque rod, and I've told you guys before I hate torque rods, but where this torque rod goes into the elevator on the bottom, where this torque rod joins the elevator and the horizontal stabilizer, the EPO material on the other side gets very thin. So when I was putting this together, I noticed that down here, right along that seam, the hinge material is very, very thin, if not broken apart already. So the way I handle that is I put a little dab of hot glue and I let it dry just a little bit, and I take a credit card or a gift card and I swipe at it and clean it out so it doesn't gum up. But the idea is to form a little bit of a, it's hard to get an angle, but it's to form a little bit of a seal down there in the gap and to hold those two parts together. So I'm not saying yours is going to be like that. I'm saying this one was. Just be aware of it, keep an eye out for it. And if that happens, don't neglect it. You want to treat it while you're building it, because otherwise, again, your elevator separates while you're flying. It's not a good day. By the way, that's not a call out on Dynam. That's EPO. That is the nature of EPO for you. It's not a call out on Dynam at all. I've seen this on every kind of EPO plane that's made. As far as gluing, I want to point out that you have options. You can either use the contact cement that they give you. And in my experience, that contact cement is kind of slow drying. So you spend a lot of time holding parts together, which also creates an opportunity for you to gum up the works with getting glue on your fingers and then spreading it around. What I found is a much better option, and I mentioned this in the Waco build, is hot glue. So when I glued these pods on, for example, I used hot glue. When I glued the control rods on the rudder in the elevator, I used hot glue. When I glued on this little antenna, I used hot glue. Motor cowls, just a little bit of hot glue on the motor cowls, because you may end up having to do motor maintenance. You don't want to glue these things on crazy permanent. I mean, you could, but if you ever have to maintain your motors, you're going to regret it. So all I did is right on this vertical surface on the bottom, I did one drop here, and I stuck it on. Just a very small dab of glue, and that's enough to hold this cowl on. That cowl's not going anywhere. And if I need to get in there for any reason, I can just take a hobby knife and slice it free, and any damage I do will be on the bottom instead of on the top. I thought during the unbox I'd get away without gluing them, but after kind of putting the plane together, I think that's a bad idea. So I went ahead and just put a little dab of glue, 2 drops on the bottom just to hold it on, and that's it. As far as things that I don't really care about on this one, I'm not, these proprietary motor shafts, I don't know. I kind of have mixed feelings about them. I really wish they would just stick with the standard, you know, like a 3mm shaft that you could use a compression collet on, because then you can use anything. You can use any spinner, any prop that you want. The way this is set up, the spinner and prop are all keyed, and it works. I mean, it works, but it's proprietary, and for that reason, I'm not a big fan. I rather have things that are standardized so that if something goes wrong, I can just take it off and use one of my spares that I have. So I think that's my only real gripe about the motor arrangement. They are counter-rotating props and they spin outward. And of course the spinners, you know what I feel about these plastic spinners. These are no exception. These things are, they're not round. So I don't know, maybe up the road I'll fool with that a little bit, but I'm just not a big fan. One other thing I'm going to talk about is that in the last video that I did where I mentioned needing some help, I talked about power system upgrades for the C47 and the Waco. So I'm not going to cover that information again tonight, but if you want the details, make sure you check out that video because I talk in detail about it. I'll leave it at this. This airplane got a 4S battery. I'm not concerned about the ESCs. I'm not concerned about the wattage. I'm not concerned about the amperage. To get it to balance on 4S, I had to add those 3 weights on the back. There we go. There are the 3 weights that I added to the tail, and I just hot glued those on. I'm not concerned about it one bit because in the 4S setup, it's something like 200 watts more power. I'll live with the extra weight on the plane. I'm not afraid of that one bit. You'll notice that the airplane has the navigation lights. It's got the blinkers on the pods there. There's green. And there's the red on the port side. So this is a fully functional plane. It's got flaps, which I have 2 settings. I've got a takeoff flap and I've got a landing flap. And then of course, you know, the elevator, ailerons, and then rudder, obviously that'll also steer the plane. So there's the rudder. And then the landing gear, I'll show you the retracts real quick. You know, on some of the Phoenix planes, I complain that their gear door are arranged so that when the gear are retract, that the gear door hang down below the bottom of the wing. And in this Dynam Grand Cruiser, man, they really just kept it simple. There's nothing fancy about it, but it works. So there's the gear closed up. Everything's set where it's supposed to be. And then there's the gear extended. Real simple, nice and clean. Doesn't necessarily have the beauty rings or the beauty covers that you'll see on the Warbirds. Maybe you lose a little aerodynamic efficiency, I understand that, but it's one less thing to worry about falling off and losing in flight like happened on my P-51 Mustang from Tower Hobbies. The wiring arrangement is nice and tidy on the bottom of the wing. Make sure when you put these pods on, I actually use the antenna that they sent as a tool to kind of press that wire into the slot. And the wire just runs right here under these magnetic housings into the canopy. That's about all I've got on the build or assembly review of the Dynam Grand Cruiser. It went together very easily, and I expect, with especially the 4-cell pack, I expect this thing to really fly excellent. It should be a great flying airplane, and we will get the maiden done just as quickly as possible. Okay, as far as other updates, I want to remind everybody, if you're new to the channel, we're running a sweepstakes. The winners are going to be announced in the next couple of days. It's not too late to get your name in. All you have to do is look for the free stuff video. Make sure you make a comment at the bottom of that, and then send me an email with the title of the last article posted on rcvideoreviews.com. So real simple entry, and I'm giving away a G32 Tomcat motor, brushless motor, and a Gavin 6C radio and receiver. If you haven't entered yet, make sure you do it, because I'm going to be drawing names here pretty soon. One other thing that I covered in the Need Help video was a power test that I did on the 70mm EDF that Bitco Hobby sent me for evaluation. I solicited input from everybody on what airframe to put this in. So if you haven't watched the Need Help video, please take a look at that and make your suggestions after you watch that video in the comment section, because I really do want to get that airplane ordered and get this jet put in it so we can get this out at the field and fly it as well. Those are the two updates I had. I just wanted to remind everybody that the sweepstakes are still open, and if you haven't taken a look at that Need Help video, please do, and if you have some input or feedback on the airframe to use for that EDF motor, I'd like to hear about it. That's all I've got, guys. The Dynam Grand Cruiser is just a real easy airplane to put together. I think the hardest thing about the whole build was getting all the wires to fit inside the cabin, because you've got so many of them. You've got flaps and retracts and ailerons and rudder and elevator and throttle, and they all converge in a very small spot on this airplane. You kind of had to stuff it all in there. Oh, and lights. How could we forget the lights? That was probably the hardest thing of the whole build. Other than that, it went together really well, and I know this airplane's going to fly well. I can't wait to try it out. Be on the lookout on the channel for the maiden. Hope you enjoyed the video. Have a great night.